Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for a story tonight. And have I got a lovely story for you? So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, 62-year-old Dr. Van didn't look up from his computer when mother and daughter entered his very neat, well-ordered office that consisted of a single walnut desk with only a computer on it for company, along with a photograph of a woman standing next to two adult children, smiling warmly into the camera. They were likely the doctor's wife and children. There was a wall covered with an impressive collection of framed certificates, and a long sideboard consisting of drawers that probably contained a plethora of medical stuff. Yvette did not like doctors at all. She'd always had a huge aversion to them since she was a little girl, when her mother had dragged her, kicking and screaming, to get vaccinated here at the surgery. She had not been to this place for many years. The whole place had undergone a miraculous makeover, so that the surgery bore no similarity to the dingy, rather run-down doctor's offices she had visited all those years ago. At the time, the makeshift doctor's rooms had been scruffy with very basic furnishings, which included steel tables and chairs, and a run-down filing cabinet. But now everything looked a lot more upmarket and sophisticated, like a photograph that is transformed from the mediocre to the glossy. So the place bore no relationship to what Yvette had remembered as a child. Even the reception area looked like it had been plucked out of the latest edition of Hello magazine, with large vases tumbling over with flowers, wrought iron and glass coffee tables, covered with the latest editions in upmarket magazines, and sumptuously cosy leather couches, along with a selection of Van Gogh-style watercolours on the walls. As a girl, Yvette had abhorred the sight of blood and a needle being injected through her skin. It had always made her faint. Dr. Van had told her the injection would never hurt her, but to her it always did. Twice she'd actually passed out in front of the doctor after she'd been jabbed. "Honestly, Yvette," her mother would say, "it's a needle, for goodness sake. It's not going to kill you. Anyone would think you'd been physically mauled and attacked by a wild animal, or something equally as bad. I didn't raise you to be such a wimp." At the time, Dr. Van who had been a whole lot younger back then, had laughed and said, "I've had worse, Mrs. Wiseman. Believe me, I've had worse." "I find that very hard to believe, Dr. Van her mother had said. "I just think you're being awfully nice." "It hurts," Yvette had told her mother, who had rolled her eyes at the back of her head in exasperation. "Why are you so squeamish, love? It makes no sense. Of course it doesn't hurt, Yvette. It's all in your head." "But I hate the sight of blood, Mummy. I really hate it. It makes me feel faint." Yvette's mother had believed her daughter was being overly dramatic, but those tormenting memories of being poked and prodded at every doctor's appointment as a girl had left behind their indelible scars that for Yvette could not be easily wiped away. As a consequence, Yvette's opinions of doctors were not exactly good. She believed doctors needed to be avoided at all costs, unless your life was in serious jeopardy, of course. She held a similar viewpoint of dentists and anyone else in the medical profession for that matter. When her daughter Riley was born, she had never accompanied her daughter for her childhood vaccines, because of her own traumatic memories of those inauspicious doctor's appointments. She had recruited her sister Leslie to do the dirty deed for her instead, and take little Riley to the surgery herself. Leslie had whisked Riley off to all her doctor's appointments, but when her daughter had returned from her vaccinations, she was as cool as a cucumber, as if nothing untoward had happened to her. Yvette had been more than a little bewildered. She had emphatically believed her little girl would have been disturbed by being prodded by a needle, but it would seem that little Riley didn't even bat an eyelash. "See, I told you it would be fine," her sister had told her. "Riley was an absolute trooper. Even when the doctor gave her an injection, she didn't wince once. She doesn't have a ridiculous aversion to needles like you do, Yvette. The doctor gave her a once-over and a marshmallow mouse, and she was as happy as Larry." It had taken Yvette all the courage she could muster to drag her daughter Riley along to the surgery this morning. But sometimes you had to do what needed to be done, even if you were loath to do it, but you did it to be a responsible mother. Dr. Van Neeson had changed a lot since Yvette had last seen him, when she was a girl. She had always come to the surgery on the insistence of her overzealous mother, who brought her to Dr. Van Neeson at the first sign of a stomachache, or even a hint of a cough. Yvette doubted Dr. Van Neeson would remember her, but she could recall him very clearly. She tried to wipe away the tormenting memories of him slamming a needle into her arm when he was removing blood for a test or giving her a standard vaccination. She had to admit that Dr. Van Neeson looked good for a man of his years. Although his crop of brown hair had taken a significant beating by the hands of time, as much of its thickness had disappeared, his hair was now rather thin, and he had a receding hairline, as well as a prominent bald patch on the top of his head. But in a strange way the look rather suited him, gave him character, she thought. He had kind eyes, the colour of dirty ice, a blue-grey crystal sort of colour, you could say, framed by distinctive round glasses that rather reminded Yvette of something Harry Potter would likely wear. Dr. Van Neeson was smartly attired, wearing an expensive pinstripe shirt and a rather flashy colourful tie. He was still as slim as a reed. When she had visited him as a girl, he'd always worn a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck, but not this time. Times had certainly changed since then. Dr. Van Neeson cleared his throat. He gestured for both mother and daughter to take a seat on what looked like to be very smart leather chairs. "It's Yvette Wiseman, is that right?" he asked, looking up from his computer directly at Yvette. "And this is your daughter?" "Yes, this is my daughter Riley. She's 7 years old." "Ah, here we are. I see, Miss Wiseman. You've not been at the surgery for a long, long time," he said, looking directly at her. "I thought you looked vaguely familiar. I remember you coming here with your mother when you were a wee girl. That was quite a long time ago. I seem to remember you were terrified of needles. You didn't like coming here very much, did you? Your mother was very vigilant about bringing you to the surgery for your regular checkups, which you never appreciated." Yvette flushed, feeling the colour creeping up her cheeks. She hoped his last comment wasn't a dig. "That's right, Doctor. You've got quite a good memory. Nothing's changed. I'm still terrified of needles." She didn't add that she included doctors in that reference. The doctor chuckled. "Well, you're not alone, Miss Wiseman. A lot of people are afraid of needles. Your daughter Riley has been brought to the surgery by your sister Leslie from time to time. Is that right, for vaccinations and checkups, I see?" "That's right, Doctor. I just don't like watching anyone being injected. I'm squeamish. That's why I get Leslie to bring her." Dr. Van Neeson nodded, as if he understood. "Is your address the same as the one your sister Leslie gave us for your residential location, Miss Wiseman? Your trailer is 27 at the Col de Claire Trailer Park. Is that right? It's not far from here. It's quite a rural location, off the beaten track, shall we say. Nice place to live. The location, I mean," he said rather diplomatically. Yvette inwardly winced. She knew very well how unglamorous the trailer park was. But the doctor was right. One thing she couldn't complain about was living in such an idyllic part of the world, with mountain trails and wood groves teeming with wildlife. "That's right, Doctor." Dr. Van Neeson began to tap away on his computer, and then he looked up at Yvette with a quizzical expression on his face. She couldn't believe he recognized her from all those years back. But then again it was hard to forget a patient who collapses on the floor after they've had a needle inserted into their arm. The memory continued to make Yvette flush with embarrassment, with the heat now physically rising from her chest, upper arms and face. Her mother was right. She could be such a drama queen, and she had left the surgery howling back then, like a wild animal that had been seriously injured. She couldn't help it. She had a low pain threshold, and the sight of the injection had burned her for days afterwards, although nobody believed her about that. Once again her mother had said it was all in her head, and Yvette was loath to admit that her mother was probably right. Growing up she had learnt that her mother was right about most things. "So what can I do for you, Miss Wiseman? It is Miss Wiseman, isn't it? You're not married, are you?" he asked. "I know some of my patients don't appreciate being called Miss if they're married." "That's right, Doctor. I'm Miss Wiseman. I'm not married." The doctor raised a brow. His eyes were kind. "How can I help you, Miss Wiseman?" "It's my daughter Riley," said Yvette gingerly. She paused for a brief moment, took in a deep breath and said, "My daughter's teacher, Julia Harris, insisted we came to see you. That's why I'm here." "I see," said the doctor. What Yvette failed to tell Dr. Van Neeson was the teacher had done more than that. She had threatened to report Yvette to the social services if her daughter did not see a doctor at once. Yvette shuddered inwardly as she recalled her less than amicable rendezvous with the no-nonsense, rather belligerent teacher, who'd waved a warning finger at her and practically had the audacity to call her a deadbeat mother. That teacher had come to the trailer park, located her trailer, and paid her a personal visit on her private turf. "What kind of a mother are you, Miss Wiseman?" she had chided. "Your daughter Riley needs serious help. We are all extremely concerned about her condition here at Jubilee. Your daughter fails to interact in classes with both children and teachers. She's become increasingly subdued of late. Things are getting progressively worse for her. She is distracted and caught up in her own world, and her failure to interact is deeply concerning. You have not done a damn thing about her condition. During classes she gives us a nod for yes and a shake of her head for no, but beyond that we don't get a peep out of her. Your daughter, Miss Wiseman, used to be the class clown, but now she's fading away before our very eyes into obscurity. And this is most unlike the feisty little girl that first arrived at Jubilee. There's something going on with her. It needs investigation. You have not taken your parental responsibilities seriously enough, I'm afraid. If you don't take Riley to the doctor at once, I will be forced to call social services immediately. I'm sorry, Miss Wiseman. I don't mean to issue threats to you, but your daughter's well-being is my prerogative as her teacher." "But you can't do that, Mrs. Harris. That's not right," Yvette had almost bleated. "My daughter's going to be just fine. She doesn't need a doctor. I'm sure she'll come right." "That's where I disagree with you, Miss Wiseman. Her condition has gone on for long enough, and is a cause of great concern among the teachers at the school. This problem needs addressing immediately. We do not know if it's psychological or physical, but she needs to see a doctor at once." "Ah, so the teacher encouraged you to come here. Is that right, Miss Wiseman?" said Dr. Van Neeson, giving her a sympathetic look, almost as if he sensed that she had been bullied to come here, probably against her will, like when she'd been dragged to the surgery as a little girl to have her vaccinations. There was no doubt that doctors definitely had patient types, Yvette secretly suspected. Those that were so paranoid they virtually visited the doctor every week at the first sign of an ailment that they could not diagnose, where they probably thought they were dying of cancer or had developed a rare deadly brain tumour, when they discovered their symptoms uncannily matched Mr. Google. Those were the hypochondriacs, who were usually healthy, but always looking to find something that proved that they weren't. Then there were the regulars who liked to visit the doctor for general overviews of their health, like taking your car to have its annual service, to make sure it still runs on full steam. Then there were those who only visited the doctor when they were sick. Then you had the very infrequent patients, those who had to be practically dying before they visited a doctor. Those, much like herself, who had a distinct aversion of doctors and would avoid seeing them at all costs. It would seem that Dr. Van Neeson recognized that Yvette Wiseman needed to be handled with care, like a fragile piece of porcelain china that was so delicate it could break in your hands. She was the evasive patient type, the type that were as elusive as the Scarlet Pimpernel, that you rarely got to see, as visits from people like Yvette Wiseman were as rare as a sighting of a leopard in the wilds of Africa, where it is claimed sightings of these cats are few and far between, and if you do get to see one on a wildlife safari, you're considered especially lucky. That's right, Doctor.
So what is the problem with Riley?
Riley hasn't been speaking, Doctor. The doctor's eyes flickered over to the 7-year-old girl. He gave her a friendly wink and a smile, and then returned his gaze directly to Yvette.
I see. So Riley has not been speaking.
That's right, Doctor.
How long has this been going on for?
It's been about a month, Yvette lied, not wanting to admit it had been closer to 2. It had been 2 months of silence, where her daughter Riley had not uttered a single word.
A month,
said Dr. Van Niesen, looking somewhat nonplussed. His steady gaze returned to the little girl, sitting stoically next to her mother. She appeared to be staring vacantly into space, almost as if she was completely disconnected from her own body, and was hundreds of miles away. Her vacant look had not gone unnoticed by Dr. Van Niesen. At Yvette's startling revelation, the doctor frowned. His expression registered grave concern, and behind his warm veneer she could see the faint hint of distrust dapple his face, which he tried to conceal well.
Does your daughter have any other symptoms, Miss Wiseman?
Yvette shook her head vigorously. She's absolutely fine, Doctor. She eats, watches television, does her homework. Everything else is perfectly normal. The teacher says she's not paying attention in class and she seems to daydream a lot. But the big problem concerning the school is that she hasn't spoken at all. And she used to be the life and soul of the party, so to speak. The doctor wheeled up his chair, drawing Riley towards him. He massaged her throat.
Open your mouth, Riley, he said. Let's see what's going on in here, shall we?
He inserted an ice pop stick at the back of her throat and took a long, hard look into the little girl's mouth with a torch. Riley stared up at the doctor through wide eyes. She looked like a rabbit that had been caught in a cage and wasn't amused to have instruments flung down her throat like this.
Does it hurt when I press your throat over here? Asked the doctor.
Riley shook her head.
What about over here?
She shook her head again.
And how about over here?
Once again, Riley shook her head. Yvette interceded on her daughter's behalf. Riley's absolutely fine, Dr. Van Niesen, she said almost indignantly. If anything were hurting her, Doctor, I promise you I'd have brought her here straight away. Despite what her teacher, Julia Harris, might say at Jubilee, I'd have brought her here a long time ago if that were the case. Like I told you, my daughter can't talk. I think she's decided not to speak. And that's her choice, isn't it, Doctor? No one should force her to do what she doesn't want to do. It's a free world, isn't it, Dr. Van Niesen?
Well, said Dr. Van Niesen, if she's not talking, Miss Wiseman, after being the so-called life and soul of the party at her school, that is troubling indeed. Your daughter appears to have undergone a complete personality change. I don't see any signs of physical trauma here. The airwaves are clear. I don't see any growths of any kind obstructing the back of the throat.
When the doctor said this, Yvette's skin began to crawl. Was the doctor talking about cancer, she wondered? Did he really mean to say tumours rather than growths? Cancer was an ugly word, and she didn't want it to be connected to her 7-year-old daughter in any way. Dr. Van Niesen's ominous words gave Yvette pause for some rather unsettling thoughts that she certainly did not want to be entertaining. Could it be her daughter's inability to speak was not just a decision on Riley's part, but connected to some underlying insidious disease that had stolen her voice away? The idea had never occurred to Yvette until now, and the thought filled her with grievous horror. She found her legs spontaneously trembling beneath her, as the jarring thought of Riley having cancer just did not bear thinking about. What if Riley's enigmatic condition was a physical illness that she'd failed to address? Maybe then her daughter's teacher, Julia Harris from Jubilee, was right, and she was a useless mother after all. Please God, she thought, may Riley be all right.
I think, Miss Wiseman, we may be dealing with something psychological here, said Dr. Finneeson. "Can you think of anything, Miss Wiseman, that could make your daughter react in this way? I am talking about an upsetting, stressful event, perhaps, that might have brought this all on."
Yvette shook her head. "No," she lied. "I can't think of anything at all, Doctor. Nothing comes to mind." The doctor lowered his gaze and did not maintain any eye contact with Yvette.
"I appreciate, Miss Wiseman, that some things are difficult to discuss and to talk about. But this is your little girl we are talking about. We need to get to the bottom of this mystery, to find answers we seek to explain your daughter's symptoms. From what I can glean at this stage of the game, once, of course, we can rule out any other physical issues that might have brought this condition on, I'm inclined to believe your daughter has been through a traumatic event. And trauma can do bad things to our mental well-being, Miss Wiseman. Children are impressionable, but I'm sure you know that well."
Yvette said nothing but pressed her lips tightly together, while inwardly Dr. Finneeson's words were making her recoil as she thought about the very thing that had happened, that she believed emphatically had brought all this stress on for her daughter Riley. But this was not something she would be willing to share with a living soul, let alone Dr. Finneeson. If she was to tell the doctor of such things, he'd probably believe she belonged on a funny farm. No, it was much better to appear ignorant and hope the doctor would find a solution to make her daughter talk again. Was there not some kind of medicine that Riley could take, to calm her down perhaps, and therefore aid in her recovery? Dr. Finneeson continued. He cleared his throat, which he seemed to do rather regularly.
"So you say, Miss Wiseman, you live in a trailer home at the Col de Clare trailer park. I know it very well. I go past that way every day."
"That's right, Dr. Finneeson. That's where I live."
"Well, could you tell me what are your living relationships like? Is Riley's father around, perhaps? Or is there another man in your life?"
Yvette felt annoyed. She lifted up her chin, and her defiant eyes locked with Dr. Finneeson's. She felt affronted about him asking her personal details about her life. He was here to diagnose her daughter's condition, wasn't he? And what he could do about it, not to ask her about whether she was shacked up with a man or not. As far as Yvette was concerned, this was none of Dr. Finneeson's business. She gritted her teeth together. "What has this got to do with my daughter's condition, Dr. Finneeson? My living arrangements are personal, and I'd appreciate you not asking me personal questions, because they have nothing to do with you. I came here for Riley's sake. As you can appreciate, I certainly didn't expect to be interrogated about whether her dad is on the scene or not."
"Miss Wiseman, please don't take offence,"
said Dr. Finneeson, waving a hand to subdue the heated tension in the surgery, caused by Yvette's obvious indignation.
"I need to ask these uncomfortable personal questions, Miss Wiseman. It's not easy to ask them. It may seem intrusive of me, but I'm sure you are as eager as I am to get to the bottom of this mystery as to why your daughter Riley is refusing to talk. I cannot help, nor can I get to the bottom of this conundrum without asking some rather impertinent questions, I'm afraid, that might appear rude on the surface. I do not believe Riley had a stroke at her young age, or any kind of growth that would result in this condition. I believe Riley has been traumatized by something. So the reason I'm asking you these questions about the men in your life is I'm inclined to think that there is a distinct possibility that something or even someone has caused your daughter distress. And my impression is that it could be some kind of emotional trauma that your daughter may have sustained, with or without your knowledge. Once, of course, we have ruled everything else out, but this is where my opinion is leaning, Miss Wiseman."
"I don't live with anyone, Dr. Finneeson. For your information, I did live with a guy about 2 months back. He was a trucker and moved in with me, but he wasn't around very much. He's out of the picture now for good. I can assure you, if you're suggesting he was violent towards my daughter, or something like that, you're wrong. I'm very protective of Riley, Dr. Finneeson. I would never leave anyone around her who had a predisposition to violence. I can assure you of that. I'm a responsible mother, and Riley has always been my top priority. I know she really liked my ex-boyfriend,
and he would never ever have hurt her."
"I see," said Dr. Finneason, giving Yvette the once-over, almost as if he sensed she might be hiding something. But if he thought this was the case, he said nothing.
"Of course it goes without saying, Miss Wiseman, I will refer your daughter Riley to an EMT specialist, in case something physical is going on here that I haven't seen."
Yvette nodded.
The doctor continued, "If Riley is deliberately choosing not to talk, Miss Wiseman, this is something that is known as selected mutism. It happens in young children when they've been exposed to trauma. So I need to ask the awkward questions again, Miss Wiseman. I would like you to think long and hard about this. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help in any way I can. Think about it for a moment, Miss Wiseman. Has Riley at any stage seen any form of violence in or around her home?"
"Of course not, Dr. Finneason. I keep telling you that," said Yvette defensively. "I don't know what you're implying, Doctor, but since Riley was born, I've only had 2 boyfriends. None of them would have ever laid a hand on Riley, and I can promise you of that."
"What about you, Miss Wiseman? Have you ever been, a little aggressive towards your daughter? In the heat of the moment, perhaps? Parents can do things sometimes when they're under stress, lash out when they don't mean to. I imagine it's very hard being a single mother, raising a daughter on your own."
"I can't believe you would even suggest that, Dr. Finneason. I'm shocked. I would never lay a hand on Riley. I haven't touched her since she was born. Never even given her a slap. The only kind of touch I give my daughter are hugs and kisses. Nothing else. I would never ever hurt my daughter."
"Miss Wiseman, this is not about you. I'm not trying to pick at you or implicate you in anything. It's my job to ask these questions, and that's all I'm doing. What about the Cole-de-Clare trailer park where you live? How many trailers are in that park?"
"You do ask some funny questions, Dr. Finneason. I don't know. At a guess, I'd say between 40 or 50, perhaps. But our trailer's not next to any of the others. It's very private. It's situated opposite a field of ponies on the left-hand side, and directly opposite a wood grove that stretches back for many miles. The land is actually owned by a man who owns the trailer park, who's got all kinds of businesses on the go. I paid him extra for our trailer to be completely private. I don't want to be living on top of the other people. The arrangement works well. My daughter regularly goes in the field to feed the ponies, although that part of the property belongs to a rancher, I believe."
"I see. Have you seen any violence among the people living at the Cole-de-Clare trailer park? I mean, could your daughter have witnessed something first-hand, perhaps?"
"Well, there's been arguments, rowdy fighting, a bit of drinking. You do get some rough types living in a trailer park, Doctor. I'm sure you know that. I admit it's not the best place to raise a kid. I'm well aware of that. I wish we could live somewhere else, but I can't afford to. I give Riley the best life I possibly can, Dr. Finneason. Our trailer is really beautiful on the inside and outside, thanks to my sister Leslie. She renovated it for us, so it's really stunning. I assure you nothing has happened among the residents in our trailer park to warrant my daughter not speaking. Nothing that I can pinpoint, unless she was eyewitness to something that I do not know about, which I admit is a possibility." "What sort of event, Miss Wiseman, may your daughter have witnessed?" asked Dr. Finneason soberly. "Well, there's all sorts of stuff going on in the trailer homes, Doctor. There's a man in one of the trailers. His name is Ivan Rawlings. I know for a fact he beats his wife up. I've heard her screams and seen her emerge from the trailer with black eyes and stuff like that. But I don't personally think Riley has witnessed any of this first-hand, although it's not impossible that she might have seen something untoward happening that I just don't know about." Dr. Finneason probably thought she was an irresponsible mother, exposing her daughter Riley to a seedy way of life, where Riley witnessed her smoking spiffs, snorting cocaine and drinking heavily. Yvette could not blame Dr. Finneason for thinking this, but she did none of these things. However, she was all too well aware that this kind of untoward activity did occur regularly in the trailers. Even in the dumpster she found used needles, mountains of beer cans, bottles of spirits, and she'd seen the entrails of spiffs, so she knew what went on at the trailer park. She was very well aware of it all. Even to look at, Yvette had almost certainly seen better and happier days herself. These days she couldn't afford beauty treatments, hair appointments, visits to nail salons, memberships to gyms. Her appearance reflected her hard life. She bit her nails nervously down to the skin. Her body was ever so slightly emaciated, like someone who hadn't enjoyed a hearty meal for quite a while, as Yvette never ate very much. Whenever she caught sight of her sorry reflection in the long mirror in the ladies' powder room at the Gourmet Gallery, where she'd give herself a brief once-over, she was unable to recognize the scrawly creature in the mirror. Her home-dyed peroxide blonde flyaway hair looked rather thin and lacked lustre. How different she thought she'd look with a bit of expensive pampering. It was easy to look good if you had money at your disposal. But Yvette's money was always in short supply. 1 minute it was in her hand, the next it seemed to have all but gone. Yvette knew only too well how tough life in a trailer park could be, and how many people tried to escape their financial misfortunes and accumulating hardships by using drugs or drinking themselves senseless to escape the hard brutality of their lives. But having said that, she also well knew that even rich, well-to-do people did that. There was a wealthy family whose daughter was in Riley's class at school, and although loaded, the mother was a raging alcoholic. So there we are, that's the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.